Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the From the Periphery podcast. I'm Eli Ayoub, and I'll be your host today. Myanmar has recently experienced one of its most devastating earthquakes in recent memory. As we have seen time and time again, however, natural disasters in military-controlled states, as well as other dictatorships, reveal much more than just physical destruction. So in today's episode, we will examine the earthquake's impact and the response from Myanmar's military junta, whose priorities are far removed from the suffering of ordinary citizens. More importantly, we will explore how resistance groups against the junta, as well as other local communities, have mobilized in remarkable ways, despite overwhelming challenges. To help us navigate this story, I am joined by two activists. Tinsar Shenlei Yi is the coordinator of the Sisters to Sisters Myanmar campaign, and Debbie Stothard is the founder of the Alternative ASEAN Network for Burma. With them, we will explore what genuine solidarity with Myanmar's people looks like in this moment of crisis, and how we might reimagine humanitarian responses beyond the state-centric models that fail time and time again. As always, thank you for listening.
Yes, hello, Minglara. This is Tinsar Shenlei. I've been an activist in the past 15 years. I've been working with different grassroots civil society organizations.
Okay, hi, I'm Debbie Stothard, founder and coordinator of ASEAN Burma, the Alternative ASEAN Network on Burma. I'm not from Burma. I'm actually Malaysian, but I've been an activist supporting human rights and democracy in Burma, Myanmar since 1988.
Amazing. So let's talk a bit about the earthquake itself. I figured we can start with that as a sort of our baseline, and then of course we'll use that to contextualize the wider quote unquote conflict, or however we want to call it, and the junta's response, and of course people's resistance against the military dictatorship. What happened exactly?
So on 28 March, around afternoon time, like people in Myanmar, especially along the Sagai Fort, Sagai, Mandalay, and several townships along the Sagai Fort have felt an extreme earthquake that hit the Myanmar. I would say it's one of the first kind. Like we never had that kind of earthquake, like 7.7 magnitude. So after 14 days, since 28 March, the earthquake has claimed over 3,600 people, and also more than 5,000 injured, and more than 48,000 homes were destroyed along the areas. But these numbers are just a verified number that are announced and declared by the junta. So the number on the ground could be higher than that. So the earthquake hit Myanmar, and there are other different events are happening in parallel as well. Yeah.
Right, and I mean we can not trust the numbers that a dictatorship would put forward, I guess for obvious reasons. So it's fair to assume that the numbers are much higher than that. How has the dictatorship, the junta, how have they responded to the earthquake?
So right after this, especially it's not just these areas, like also the junta main capital, the Naypyidaw, also was severely damaged by the earthquake. So there are so many staff housing, including the military base, the offices are also destroyed. So they immediately call for international support, especially to India and China and neighboring countries like Southeast Asian nations. So that was the immediate response. And also at the same time, they continue attacking civilians in different resistant areas. For example, even in the last year alone and the whole month or last month, they have been conducting airstrikes, almost 7 airstrikes every day. So they keep doing this. So we were also surprised, like even their airbase were also attacked by the earthquake. I mean, like airbase were also destroyed, but still they managed to fly out. The air fighter jets were also managed to fly out and keep conducting airstrike in several resistant areas. So we have recorded more than like 60 airstrikes since the earthquake time, across the resistant areas. So that's what's happening in parallel at the same time.
It's absolutely outrageous because the first thing that a lot of people failed to notice was that there were 152 air strikes and artillery attacks against civilians after the earthquake happened. So between 28th March and 10th of April, there were 152 air and artillery attacks against mostly civilians. And a lot of children, men and women were killed. The military took their time about announcing a so-called humanitarian ceasefire. They did so on the 2nd of April, about 5 days after the earthquake took place. But even then, since this so-called ceasefire was announced by the junta, there have been 90 attacks. So between 2nd and 10th of April, in the 8 days, there were 90 attacks. So these are all verified, and I think a lot of people are very bitter about what's happened. Not just because the junta has killed about the same number of people that the earthquake have, since they tried to seize power in a coup in 2021, but the fact that the junta reserved all of its revenue for committing warfare. So there wasn't equipment. They didn't release equipment to allow volunteers to dig out survivors. So a lot of delays happened on the ground. The junta insisted that people first report themselves, like how many people who were volunteering for relief work. So if you wanted to help out people in your neighborhood, you had to go and register with the junta authorities if you were living in an area under their control. And that delayed people. And what's really scary is that when people were out at night doing the relief work, young people were actually being forcibly conscripted. They were being arrested and taken off to join the army. So we have this really horrific thing where the junta's forcible conscription of young people hasn't stopped, even though the earthquake happened. And people are actually afraid, young people are afraid to go out at night to stay out too late helping with relief work, because they are worried that they will be abducted and forced to join the army. So we've had quite there are about 100 cases. There's actually documentation of forcible conscription of at least 100 young people since 28th of May. And what has happened is that the junta slowed people down. So, I mean, there were survivors. There were some miraculous individual cases of survival where people were taken out the ruins about a week after the quake. But the problem was that the junta slowed things down. They didn't actually release medicines and supplies. They didn't release equipment. I mean, this is the horrific situation where not only did they fail to respond, they actually stopped and delayed people who were trying to say go from Rangoon and less affected zones to go and do relief work, to take supplies, emergency supplies, were being stopped at checkpoints. People were being threatened with arrest, especially if they were suspected of trying to get relief supplies to areas not under the junta's control, trying to take relief supplies into resistance areas, resistance-held areas. So it's fucking outrageous. It's fucking outrageous that this is what's happening. And then the international community is trying to appease the junta by saying, oh, let us go in, allow us to come and give aid. But the thing is that people on the ground were helping each other. Even in Kachin State, Kachin state has been in a state of war for has been in a state of war since 2011. And yet, the Kachin Baptist Church and Kachin Civil Society raised 163 million chat, 163 million chat in dollar terms or in euro terms are not that much, but it is a huge amount for the local people. And people were the KBC, the Kachin Baptist Church, actually were sheltering 200 earthquake survivors in their Mandalay, in their center in Mandalay. So you could see that Shunlei herself and a number of young people, activists, even communities in exile have been actively raising funds and sending money inside confidentially for community-based organizations to do the work. So the issue is not about the fact that the junta is somehow impoverished. They spent all their money on buying new weapons, on new drones, on buying new jets from Russia. It's not about that. It's just that they could just stand back and let people get on with it. But no, they refused to. In fact, a couple of international teams tried to go in. The team from China was allowed to go in, and they got a big welcome from the Burmese junta. Although in one incident, the junta actually opened fire on a convoy of the China Red Cross vehicles traveling across the border in northern Shan State. But then they recovered from that and welcomed everybody else. But they also welcomed a Malaysian team. But the Malaysian team was there for less than a week. They were only there for a few days. They were escorted into Sagaing town, which is under military control, and they were allowed to dig out 2 mosques. But there was the French team were not told when they arrived. They said, "Oh, the period for recovery, the rescue teams have to go back tomorrow, so you have less than 24 hours on the ground, so you might as well just leave." So they actually arrived and weren't allowed to do the relief work. And they delayed the visas of the US team as well. So we could see that the junta actually willfully interfered and blocked aid from, been weaponizing aid, and that's something that actually is quite part of their track record. Whether it was Typhoon Yagi or Cyclone Mocha in the past couple of years, they weaponized aid to the point that people who were waiting to get aid were so despairing that many of them committed suicide because the junta was preventing local people from going into disaster-affected areas like by Cyclone Mocha and Typhoon Yagi, and they were actually blocking aid from going in, and they were actually blocking local people from going into those areas to offer help. So you can already start seeing that it's not just a case of the military being negligent. The military is actually being willfully malevolent when it comes to this situation. And what is quite interesting is that the junta has been covering up the extent of the damage in Naypyidaw, the capital that the military built or organized in 2004. When they moved the capital from Rangoon to Naypyidaw, they have been covering up the extent of the damage because they don't want to show their weakness. But we definitely can see there's been some pretty horrific situations happening. Sagaing, there were, in Mandalay and Sagaing, there were a number of mosques that completely collapsed in the earthquake because these mosques were very old, and successive regimes had prevented the local community from, they refused to give them permission to renovate or strengthen, to do work to repair these mosques. So these buildings were getting older and weaker over the decades. So this earthquake not just that, did not just cause all these mosques to collapse. It was Friday afternoon prayers. It was the Friday before Eid. So a lot of people died. And it's really important to understand that the damage that happened in Burma, especially with to hospitals and schools and civilian institutions, is partly because of decades of willfully impoverishment of this type of infrastructure, but also that the junta was busy killing civilians and busy trying to regain control of the country, that they didn't see disaster management or disaster prevention as a big priority. In fact, one would argue that the biggest disaster to Burma is the junta.
Yeah. So I want to definitely thank you. This was an amazingly in-depth overview, and I want to get more a bit later in this conversation on the role of this international community and how we are seeing a concrete alternative on the ground to the model that's usually like we just send money to what is considered the state, which in this case would be the dictatorship, and kind of go along with the plan. But Shunlei, if I can bring you in here, can you tell us a bit about what you've been doing, of course, as much as you can share, in response to the earthquake in terms of solidarities on the ground?
Yes, thank you. So, actually, since COVID times, Myanmar has been hit with these kind of heat hazard or earthquake or flood. Even last year there was a huge flood, from Kachin to the middle part of Myanmar, but almost like the information coming from Kachin or these areas were kind of blackout because of the internet shutdowns, because that's what's happening in parallel at the same time, because the internet shutdown has been there since before the coup, before the COVID in Oregon State, and now is expanding. Like there are more than 100 townships that are experiencing communications or internet blackout. And because of this, things had delayed more and more. So for Sister with Sister, as a group that I'm being involved and a part of, we've been trying to think like how we can be a part of supporting the local communities, especially when we look at building resilience through community activities. We thought there is an opportunity to advocate for the gender-sensitive aids and localized approach, because all the humanitarian aids are coming in, and there is a big debate on how it should be neutral or like how it should be working with the junta and so on. So we like to make a symbolic action, like there should be a localized approach, directly dealing with the local civil society that are already there since the very beginning, like since 2008 Nagis cyclone. There's so many civil society evolved and working alongside with different communities, especially with the vulnerable community. So we shouldn't, look down on these local approach, and that's what we've been advocating for. Like so. Since the earthquake hit, we had a fundraiser on Sister with Sister, and as a Sister with Sister, we've been fundraising, and we also send a collective statement that call for localized approach, especially targeting UN agency and different INGOs to work directly and closely with the local civil society on ground, and fan directly to this communities. So we've been working on that, especially as Sister with Sister. We are a network of different feminists and also young people from different genders. So we've been actively partnering with our long-term partner led by young people and women inside the country. So we are partnering with 14 civil society that are actively distributing our aids, especially gender-sensitive aids. By that mean we are advocating that we shouldn't forget about menstrual health, the hygiene and menstrual kit for all the, women, and also those assigned female at birth. So we shouldn't forget about them. So we've been actively advocating for gender-sensitive aid. So that's what we've been working with together with our partner on the ground. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. And kind of this bridges pretty nicely into the kind of the next bit, which is trying to understand for I would assume our audience as I said in the beginning, like knows a bit of the gist of the coup, for example, and have definitely heard of the junta, but for the most part don't know much of the details. How would you describe or at least can you give as long as you need here, a overview of how the coup happened, or at least the timeline since the coup, and how the way I want to try and do it is to tie in effectively the way people have been responding on the ground with how people have been resisting, sorry, against the junta before the earthquake, if that makes sense. And either of you, I'm happy to kind of sit back and and hear the two of you talk.
I think it's pretty important to understand that Burma, Myanmar has been, various parts of it, and now almost all of it has been facing conflict. In many of the ethnic areas, places like Karen State, Karenni State, even Kachin State, these places have been in a state of war for the past few decades. In fact, many people understand, I mean, when we talk about Palestine, and we recognize that Palestine and Karen people have been basically at war and facing a state of armed conflict for over 6 decades, then we kind of feel that sense of solidarity, but also understand how resilient communities have been. But having said that, there is a huge network of community-based health and social welfare groups working on the ground. In fact, there's a tradition of the backpack health worker teams that operate out of the Maytao Clinic, Dr. Cynthia's clinic. The ethnic health organizations actually have an alliance, and they train young people to become medics, and they put their medications and their supplies in their backpack, and then they hike into conflict affected zones and work with their communities to help provide public health care and basic health care. Now, these groups have been operating for decades, and they're still on the ground. And so this has been a part of the infrastructure in terms of how local people have taken care of themselves. So it wasn't so much an issue of, in many of these traditionally conflict-affected areas, it's about scaling up something that's already there. In many of the central zones, which are Burman dominated, the underground health system has been going on since 2021, because many of the civil disobedience movement leaders and activists were actually health workers and education workers, which is why the military started arresting health workers, it started killing first responders in the street, and started bombing schools and hospitals because they saw them as enemy of the state. But the survivors, the people are still working very hard on the ground. So it's not about setting up a new system. It's about making sure that enough resources get to them so that they can do what they can. There's a friend of mine who has not been that, how do I say, the earthquake was such an emergency that he was not very discreet. So he's been posting on Facebook. But as soon as it happened, people in Rangoon raised funds, they got supplies together, they got into trucks, and they found ways and means to go by the back roads and avoid military checkpoints to get to the affected zone and actually give aid to the local people. So, I have full trust and full confidence in what is happening, in what people can do on the ground. And also the fact that we have this earthquake response coordination unit operating out of Chiang Mai. A lot of activists have set up this coordination unit to raise funds, but also the Humanitarian Action Network on the border, which is actually is based on these health networks that have been operating for decades. So there are all these things that are happening on the ground. I think Shunle is talking about a very colonialistic, mainstream, and conservative approach, which is give us lots of millions of dollars, INGOs wanting millions of dollars to go in and appease the junta and get some kind of access to some kind of areas. And the attitude is, even if we lose half the money, it's fine, as long as we can get a little bit to the people who need it. But actually, when we look at the formal economy, the fact that the military has imposed an exchange rate, which is more than half the market rate. That means for every dollar that an INGO officially puts into a bank in Burma, the junta will give them, when they withdraw that money in Myanmar, they get half the value. That means the junta's just taken half your money without doing anything. And that half that money is not going to be used to help people. It's being used to buy more weapons. And so, it is, and when international organizations go in there and they actually obey the junta in order to gain access, then that's problematic. It's not just so that when they talk about aid neutrality, it's a perversion of social justice to talk about aid neutrality in Burma, because this junta is illegal. It's losing the battle. It's lost so much territory to the resistance, and the resistance has set up a local government already in many places. And yet, going in there to give them money and then to legitimize them is actually helping them consolidate their position and helping them weaponize aid.
Yeah, I
We should, yeah, sorry.
No, I was continuing your thought that effectively it's a way of almost subsidizing the military junta instead of sending the money to the people who actually need it.
Exactly. And the thing is, what Shunli is talking about in terms of localizing aid is that local people are helping each other. And we should be empowering and enabling that, because that is more sustainable. And in practical terms, it's more value for money. It's more impactful, and it contributes to local democracy.
Mm-hmm. So, given you've touched about this a number of times, and Shunlei, feel free also to jump in here. What the international response, has it been effectively the ASEAN countries as well as the UN just sending money to the junta and kind of cleaning, wiping their hands clean and not thinking about the consequences? Is this basically what's been happening?
So, so when the junta was pleading for help, so the China and India and the ASEAN country rushing to help, and that is like a like immediate response, yeah. And of course, there is another important thing to notice. Junta is planning a sham elections at the end of this year in 2025. They have been announcing it. They have been planning for it after collecting census in 2023, 2024. So the junta has been planning for elections. And these elections, they've been announcing they're going to organize it in half of these townships in the country. But then later, they realized they couldn't do it now because they're losing several territories into the ethnic resistant and different resistant groups. So they have been promoting the elections, sham election that they've been planning and in their own way. So that is a part of the whole plot, that they are now pleading help from different countries in the name of the awkward relief, but at the same time, it's indirectly asking for legitimacy as a government itself, where from our point of view, it is really risky and dangerous. And they have announced ceasefire, but they couldn't even follow their own promise about the ceasefire, and let alone the 5-point consensus that they have agreed to in 2021. And the sad reality is nobody, like no country in the ASEAN, Southeast Asian nations, or our neighboring country can hold them accountable. After 4 years of the 5-point consensus, nothing has happened, no progress, but no accountability, no consequences of the junta actions. Now these countries are rushing in to help and support these people. So our question is like, these people they are saving, we appreciate that these are different rescue team coming in and risk their life to help and rescue these individuals out of the rebels, and they save them and people applaud for it, and we are happy. Oh, these rescue teams are saving these individuals. But at the same time, what about these individuals who are burned by the junta, buying the jet fuel, buying the airstrike that the junta has been killing actively in the other areas? They are also human. They are also people of Myanmar. But why their life don't really matter to these countries? That is our main question. And we think these support that these countries are coming in could be counterproductive. As Devi has already explained, how they will weaponize the aids. And so I think there is a bigger issue and bigger image rather than just, rushing to support the Myanmar earthquake because it's a war news, it's a top news. So people in coming in, but what about a bigger picture? What about a sustainable way of, supporting Myanmar people in a longer run? Because at the same time, when you are saving these people out of rebels in the earthquake hit zone, the other people, and many thousands are also fleeing out of conflict. How are we going to solve this issue? I think it should be an opportunity for like the world's nations to look at Myanmar issue in a deeper level to ensure is whatever they are giving in, whatever they are supporting Myanmar people should be leading to a sustainable, long-term, positive peace way of doing things instead of just rushing in to support what the junta has been telling them. For example, on 6 April, the junta second board has said that every organization coming in to support should have an authorization from the junta. That's a clear example that they are not giving in permission, or they will be controlling who can support what area and how and where and etc. So several local civil society are facing also hardship, especially one young people. They are the biggest human resources in this kind of crisis. They are ready to go and rush, but now many young people are forced to flee our country. So people like myself living in exile, even though I can support and do something physically, but people like us, many young people, cannot return due to the arrest and torture and arrest warrant by the junta. So many, like the young people, the biggest population in the country, like 60% who are under 35, are now under a threat, like even to help and support our own local communities. So this is a reality that we've been facing. So several international, including these governments, have to think about bigger picture, not just following what the junta is ordering them to do. So that would be my response.
Thanks, Shalay.
I think
Debbie?
it's important to also note that the junta is actually hasn't just weaponized aid for the earthquake. It's actually using the earthquake, the disaster, the death, and the tragedy as Shunay correctly pointed out, to legitimize itself and to try and win some political points. And in that situation, they actually refused to allow the Taiwanese rescue team, earthquake teams, from entering Burma, so that they could appease Beijing. But in practical terms, the Taiwanese in this region are the most experienced in terms of earthquake response, because Taiwan itself faces a lot of earthquakes. But at this point, as of 10th of April, the news estimates that there's about 4,600 deaths confirmed from the earthquake in Burma, Myanmar, which is about the same amount of fatalities from military violence in 2024 alone. I think we need to also understand that nearly 14,000 people have died from military violence since February 2021, and nearly 30,000 people became political prisoners. And in 2024, just last year alone, over 40,000 people, mostly young men and women, were forcibly conscripted into the army. So if we look at those figures and then most people believe that the earthquake fatalities, a lot of people died needlessly, mainly because the junta was actually blocking and preventing volunteers from doing rescue, from doing the rescue work, because they were demanding that you're not, basically saying to people, you can't go and rescue people unless we give you written permission. You have to apply for written permission. And then when people were able, even people who were trying to save their own loved ones in their own homes, they didn't have equipment. They basically had to dig people out with their bare hands. So, all of those, normally in these kinds of situations, in these kinds of disasters, you want people to be able to do whatever they can to recover, not to recover, but to rescue within the first 3 days. But there were all these willful bureaucracy and blockages and checkpoints and delays, willful delays, so that the military could try and control the situation. So I think we also need to understand something else, which is the junta has been blocking communications to many parts of these, actually many parts of the country, but definitely in many of the earthquake affected areas, because Sagaing region was one of the most heavily bombed places in the past few years. And that's where the epicenter of the quake was. So the basically military violence and military warfare targeting civilian targets had already destroyed many parts of the country and many communities before the earthquake hit. And the military's obstructions and trying to capitalize on the situation and trying to use the earthquake, the disaster, to gain control of certain areas is actually making it worse. So even the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission for Human Rights, the chair, even called for countries, anyone who's offering aid needs to use this leverage to demand that the junta has a genuine ceasefire and stops these human rights violations, because that's one thing, but also at a very basic level, they need to allow communications to happen in the country. We still don't know how many people actually died, because many of the areas that were badly hit by the earthquake were subjected to communications blackouts by the military junta, even before the quake hit. So, it's extremely difficult for people to get information out. And there have been horrific stories of entire villages being destroyed and most of the people killed, but nobody knows about it. And this is what we fear will happen, that the death toll of this quake, this disaster, is going to get worse when we start finding out what happened. But also, there's been unseasonal rains. This is basically the monsoon. The monsoon period is about to start, and many people are living out in the open without much help except from local volunteer organizations. So I think we really need to push hard for the junta to step back and let the aid, local aid and localized aid, continue, and allow the international community to provide funds to scale up that localized aid.
Thank you. Thank you both for that, Debbie and Shunlei as well. I guess to sort of slowly wrap out this episode, one, I'll ask a couple of questions. The first one is there anything else that you wanted to to go over which we didn't have time to? And the second, and that's how we'll sort of end, is how can people listening to this episode help if they want, if you have names, if you have groups and resources and whatnot. And if you think of stuff later on as well, you can send them to me, of course, and I'll put them in the show notes. So yeah, is there anything else you wanted us to go over? Debbie Oceanley, right of you.
So for their localized, so there are several civil society that are operating in Thailand that are delivering and distributing all the funds that they have received back to the countries. Like that has been one of the main goal of different civil society and different medias. Even though they may be located in several other different countries due to the pressure inside the country, but they have been directly supporting and dealing with the people in the country. So there are several fundraisers since the earthquake that being led by individuals or different organizations. To name a few, like Mutual Aid Myanmar has been really active since the very beginning of the coup, and they've been supporting CDMs, the CDM Civil Disobedience Movement participants from the ministerial staff, several ministerial, and they've been distributing these funds to individuals as well as different civil society organizations. They have a big network as well. And also Better Burma is one option. It's led by Inside Myanmar Pockets. It's a humanitarian wing, as well as there are several a diaspora community has been fundraising. For example, in UK, there is a Burma Campaign UK has been also supporting several civil society, including activists in the very beginning of the coup, and they've been fundraising for the artwork as well. And also our organization as Sister to Sister, we've been fundraising for gender-sensitive aid. I think these aid also going in Myanmar is not just fulfilling the urgent needs of these community, but also it's a way to widening and expanding our civil space where we are, supporting these local actors. So we make sure these local actors are the decision makers of what the community needs. So we let them decide, and also they are the ones who defend their own community. So we also empowering these local community to decide for themselves, to defend their own community, and also it's a way of claiming civil space. They have been shrinking for a long time, but through these humanitarian action, these local actors have been actively communicating and actively, widening their space in these areas. And also in a way that is also a community organizing for several political groups, including student unions and workers, farmers, and women groups are also now organizing themselves actively. In 2008, Nahagis cyclone, I remember that was one of the a disaster where several civil societies started volunteering, organize themselves, and they formed themselves as civil society, or later they evolved as NGO. So we are seeing this is happening in Myanmar. So it's important that we support these local civil society directly, and they manage themselves and they grow themselves out of the support, and they widen their space. So any amount matter, like any amount counts for Myanmar right now. So we appreciate any support, not just financial, even a solidarity message to the people of Myanmar means a lot to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shandai.
I think it's really important to note that there's been a lot of people on the ground who have pivoted to do the earthquake relief. I mean, there's a quirky organization called Cats Association Myanmar on Facebook, and they're not just looking after cats, they're actually doing a huge amount of earthquake relief work on the ground. And there's the Myanmar Earthquake Relief Coordination Unit operating out of Chiang Mai, and the Humanitarian Action Network that's operating out of Mae Sot. Basically, everyone is focused on not just relief, but on continuing the work to help communities be resilient, because They in the past 5 years, they've been hit by COVID, they've been hit by the coup, and now they've been hit by this earthquake. And the aftershocks are still serious aftershocks, serious, scary aftershocks are still ongoing, even in communities not directly in the quake area. A number of the tremors have been so serious, so bad that the main water supplies have become contaminated. So I have a former student of mine is actually raising money just to get drinking water for local communities hundreds of kilometers away from the earthquake zone, because their main source of water are wells, and the wells have actually been damaged by the tremors even as far back. Remember, this quake was even the aftershocks continue to be felt in neighboring countries. So every bit counts. It's solidarity, it's contributions, and there is for people who are in the UK, Burma Campaign UK have a foundation that's fundraising for quick relief. So there's so much we can do with so little.
Thank you both for that. I will include everything we've mentioned in the show notes, and I guess all that's left for me to do, at least at this stage, is to thank you both for joining us on From the Periphery. From the Periphery is a worker-owned media collective. We focus on elevating voices, struggles, and ideas that are rendered peripheral and marginalized under mainstream journalism as well as academia. If you like the work we do and want to see more of it, please consider heading over to our Patreon and become a member today. For as little as $5 a month, you get access to exclusive content, early access to all of the episodes from all of the podcasts that we produce, as well as an invitation to our monthly hangout, in addition to joining the growing community around our work. If you cannot support us financially, there are still a number of ways you can support our work. You can leave a 5-star rating on the podcast app you're using, like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, leave a comment wherever you're listening, all of which will help us against the algorithm. Most importantly, tell your friends and family about us to help spread the word. Again, thank you so much for listening.